In this video, we're going to talk about programming errors and the different kinds of programming errors that we can have in our programs. We're going to talk about syntax errors. Syntax errors are errors that get detected by the compiler. Our program won't compile if it has syntax errors. And that is, syntax is the punctuation, the things that have to come before another or after another. Those are automatically detected by the compiler when you try to compile. However, a nice part of a good editor like NetBeans is that it's looking for syntax errors while you're typing the program. So we've already seen examples of this. I'll give you another one right now. We're getting a semicolon. That's a syntax error. It's like rules of grammar in English, right? We have to have a semicolon. This would be detected when we try to compile. If I go up here and do this, it tells me compiled with errors. Okay, if you ever see this screen, your project compiled with errors, whatever you do, don't check this box that say always run without asking, because you'll never see the error again. It just won't fail, and you'll end up with a code that's not running properly, and you may not even realize it. So I'm going to hit cancel here. There's no reason, if something compiles with errors, there's no reason to run it, so just cancel. Okay, so the editor, in this case, we don't have to wait till we compile, because our editor does a great job of putting the red squiggly line underneath saying you have a syntax error. So I showed you that before. So syntax errors are errors that keep the program from compiling because the compiler doesn't understand what you're trying to do because you're missing a piece of syntax. Maybe it's a punctuation or something that's spelled incorrectly. That keeps it from being able to compile the program. It can't figure out what you're trying to do, the compiler, right? Runtime errors are errors that cause a program to abort while it's running. We can't predict those. All our code is typed properly, but maybe we try to perform some operation that can't run, and we'll see an example of that in an upcoming slide. And then we have logic errors, and those are the fault of the programmer. Not that all of these aren't the fault of the programmer, but this is the programmer saying, maybe we were put in the wrong formula to calculate something. Maybe we're doing the volume of a cube, and we put that it's the side squared instead of the side cubed. It's going to print out the incorrect error, but it's not going to cause the program to crash, and it's not going to cause the program not to be able to compile. It's just going to give a wrong answer to the user. Those are errors in logic caused by the programmer. So here's a statement, a class that's got a main method. So we have the class show syntax errors. It's got a main method here. And inside the main method, we have a line that says system.out.println, welcome to Java. And it's got a syntax error in it. This isn't in NetBeans, so we can't see what the error is. We can't see right away that there's an error, but there is an error. Take a second, pause the video, see if you can figure out what the error is. Okay, maybe you paused, maybe you didn't. But the error in this one is that we're missing a quotation mark around this string. These letters, welcome to Java, needs a closing quotation mark to match the opening. That would cause your program not to compile. In a great editor, we'd have a little red squiggle under it, alerting us that there's a syntax error before we try to compile. But in this case, we don't see it, which is why it's nice to have a good editor. Okay, here's a runtime error. Public static void main, system.out.print. We're going to print the result. Now notice this isn't a string since there's no quotations around it. These are just numbers. And we're trying to do some math. Any integer divided by 0, division by 0 in math is undefined. It's also undefined in computers. So we would get something called a division by 0 error that would cause our program to crash. Okay, so that's our runtime error. It will compile just fine. This may not always be a 0 right there. That could be, maybe I have two values that I'm doing subtraction on, and somehow those two values could end up to be the same number. So if they're both 5 and 5 minus 5 equals 0, or maybe I'm doing addition and one of them's -5 and one of them's +5, I'm still dividing by 0 and it's going to crash. And the program has no way during compile time to detect that that might happen. So it's a runtime error. And when a runtime error happens, your program crashes. So let's look at an example of that. So I'm still using the same Hello World project here, but I've just changed this second line that I had before to print line, and I put 1 divided by 0. Okay. Notice there's no syntax error, no red squiggly, but when I run the program, all of a sudden I get some big red letters down here that say Hello World. Line 16 has a problem. The following error returned while executing this line, and the build failed. So my program crashed while it was running. That's a runtime error. And lastly, a logic error. And these can be hard ones to find. Okay, so we have a little program here that says show logic errors, a public static void main, and inside it we print out Celsius 35 is Fahrenheit degree, and then we have a little formula here that's supposed to be calculating the temperature in Fahrenheit. So it's using 9 divided by 5. So if you know the formula to calculate Fahrenheit, it's 9 divided by 5 times 35, and then you add 32 to the result. But the problem here is a tough one, and we'll talk about it later. But basically, we're doing 9 as an integer, 5 as an integer. When you divide those two, the answer always has to be an integer, which means it's not 1.4 or 1.8, which is what we would normally think. Because these are integers, Java treats it as a 1. So it ends up taking 1 times 35, and you don't get the right answer. Hard to see because the program doesn't crash. You don't get red squigglies telling you there's a syntax error. You just get a wrong answer, and you as the programmer have to figure out why. That's always a tough one, and I just told you about it, and we're going to do a very similar project at some point, and you might get stuck on it because you'll forget. You'll forget that I warned you about division problems, and it'll happen. That's part of being a new programmer. And that ends this chapter. This is the end of chapter 1. There are some labs to do. One lab that we'll probably end up doing together in class the first night is just printing out a message to the users, which we've seen examples of that already. The second is a program that's already written that's got some errors in it, and you need to figure out what the errors are. Both very basic programs.